anybody remember what competitive exclusion was? That's when.
I think
Like I thought it was usually perhaps looking at two animals fight over the same resources or food.
but they
Yeah, and then what happens because of the.
The resource goes down, so we get competition.
And then one species becomes completely extinct because of it. And then what about that second question? That's kind of what we're going to talk about today a little bit. Is there any way that we can think of a parasite being helpful?
if it destroys harmful things inside of an organism.
That works. Or if we're not being the ones infected by a parasite, it helps us survive more, right? So, okay, so part 3 of chapter 46. Since we kind of read that second question, we're kind of talking about parasites today, but also before that we're going to talk about mutualism. Mutualism is incredibly common in nature. The foremost example of mutualism is pollinators, and we talked about that a little bit a few weeks ago. What was an example of a pollinator? A bee. Birds pollinate. What's like the big bird we kind of think of when it comes to pollinators? Like big, I mean actually really small.
Hummingbird.
Hummingbird. Hummingbirds are big pollinators. Foxes, bears. There's a lot of different animals that are pollinators. In some cases, mutualism, neither species can complete their life cycle without the other. This is in case of a lot of plant species that have specific pollinators. They can only survive if that species is there with them. Like most flowers and stuff, they're able to be pollinated by a large amount of different animals, but there are certain species that are only pollinated by certain things. So like a lot of tube flowers, they are only able to be pollinated by hummingbirds because they have the long tongue that can reach in and get the nectar and stuff like that. And so if the hummingbird population isn't there, then the flower population will go down. They can't survive. And then in other cases, it's helpful, but not a life or death situation. Like we talked about, there's pollinators that kind of just can move around and do different things, and they're kind of helpful, but they're not exactly necessary. So, in all mutualism, there is some kind of conflict between partners, because even though they're helping each other, they're still a lot of the times competing for resources with each other. So in this case, the example is there's a fungi that forms a lichen with photosynthetic bacteria, and there's actually a picture of a lichen down there on top of a tree. But the bacteria and fungus still compete for the same food resources. So while they're helping each other collect more food, they're also still competing with each other for the food supply. And then mutualism can be used as a form of defense with our friend Nemo down there with a sea anemone and clownfish. The clownfish uses the sea anemone for protection against predators because they're immune to the stinging of anemones, unlike most other fish. And the clownfish, help the sea anemone by eating bacteria and stuff off of it and keeping it clean. Can you guys think of another form of like defensive mutualism? I mean, that's the foremost example, but yeah.
What about koalas and them eating, what is it?
The eucalyptus tree?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
The eucalyptus tree is poisonous. That's the only way you can.
Yeah, that can kind of, that's sort of.
I mean, it's not like bites of death, but
Yeah.
no, there's not like protection, but that's.
The eucalyptus protects itself because it's poisonous, and it protects the koala sort of because no other animals eat the plant. So the koala helps it, I guess. How? Do you know? it sort of works there. It's more of like the predator-prey stuff we talked about. The eucalyptus tree has developed this poison that protects it from animals, and the koala has developed a way to just work around that poison. So that's mutualism. Now we get into kind of the funner stuff. Parasite-host interactions. Parasites spend all or part of their life living in or on other organisms from which they steal nutrients. So, what's some parasites? Tapeworm, nice one we like to think about. Our fleas and ticks are parasites because they will live on things and then they drain their blood for their food. There's a lot of parasitism in the plant world. If you'll see ivy growing up on a tree, that's a parasite because it will drain resources away from the tree to survive. Many parasites are small but can be pathogens, meaning they cause diseases to their host. This is a lot of times not an intentional thing, but it's just because of the jumping around of different things that they kind of spread diseases. So like ticks spread Lyme disease a lot of the time, and it's not something that they intentionally do. It just happens that they just happen to have bacteria on them, and it spreads when they start sucking blood from stuff. Infections from parasites can weaken the host, so it is more vulnerable to predation or less attractive to potential mates. So if you've got a bunch of ticks on your face, the girls aren't going to like you as much, I would think. Is there advantage to that for the parasite, though? It doesn't seem like it, does it? It doesn't. For them to weaken their host is kind of counterproductive for the parasite. And then some parasites can cause animals to become sterile or change the sex ratio of their host species. So like some parasites can will only infect like the males of a species, and then because of that they kind of wipe out the males, and so it's just a full female population. Does anyone know what that is at the bottom there? That's a tapeworm head under a microscope. It uses these bits here to kind of dig in to the stomach lining, and then just kind of hangs out and eats and eats and eats and eats. Alright, so death from a parasite is really rare because it's disadvantage of the parasite. We were just talking about that. A weak host is a host that can't collect food, which means the parasite starves along with the host. They can't eat at the same time a host does. Usually death happens only when a parasite infects a new species that hasn't developed defenses to fight off the infection. Why do you think a parasite would have to jump to a new species?
Because the one it's on is about to die.
Yeah, that can work. So, what?
They wiped out the species.
Yeah, maybe a species is becoming extinct and the parasite is having to jump to newer and newer hosts, and that spreads more and more diseases. So, going back to the tick is on a deer, then it jumps to a human, the human starts developing Lyme disease because we haven't developed the defenses against the disease that the tick is carrying because it's not new to us. Also, the gradual drain of nutrients from a host can lead to the host becoming too weak to fight off secondary infections. So not even diseases that the